Bones can mend, and hearts can heal, but can two wounded souls truly find each other at the very moment they need it most? That question drifts like a soft wind through the sleepy streets of Cedar Grove, where our story begins. On the edge of a worn-out farm sits Walter, an aging golden retriever whose big brown eyes reflect years of lonely sunsets. Once cherished for his strong bark, he was later discarded when he became too old to guard anything but memories. Now, he watches from behind a leaning wooden fence as neighbors stroll by with laughter and loved ones. Each passing day, he wonders if anyone will ever see him for the faithful companion he's always longed to be. To the world, he's just a leftover dog. To himself, he's a soul quietly waiting for a second chance. And that chance is about to arrive. Before we dig deeper into this tale, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel, tap that like button, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another heartwarming story. Now, back to Cedar Grove, where dawn spreads a golden haze over the fields and Walter, the golden retriever, starts another day on the worn-out farm he calls home. Though the place once promised fruitful harvests and cheerful gatherings, it now feels as hollow as an abandoned barn. Walter's routine is starkly simple. Bark when a stranger strays too close, patrol the fence line at dusk, and stay silent otherwise. His owner sees him as a tool, nothing more, a reliable sentinel to keep the nights quiet. There are no tender pats on his head, no gentle words to assure him that he's more than a set of watchful eyes. Evenings bring a hush over the farmland. The dim kitchen light flickers through a cracked window, hinting at the warmth of a home from which Walter is perpetually barred. The faint smell of supper drifts his way, reminding him just how lonely it is to eat stale kibble all alone. Cicadas hum in the tall grass, and the breeze rustles the cornstalks like a lullaby for everyone but him. On this farm, love is something told in stories, not something Walter has ever truly felt. Each ring of the old dinner bell is a reminder that he remains on the outside, forever watching, but never invited in. Yet fate has a funny way of stirring the pot. Soon, a small and vulnerable stranger will wander into Walter's life, and no rusty chain or locked gate will keep that spark of hope from shining at last. As another day on the farm unfolds, Walter settles into his usual spot by the rickety fence. From there he has a clear view of the farmhouse's back porch, where people come and go with busy footsteps and lively chatter. No one stops to say hello to him, though, not a single "good boy" or friendly pat on the head. Instead, he's expected to keep watch, making sure nothing crosses the property line uninvited. Sometimes, Walter notices children laughing as they chase each other across the yard. He sees neighbors arriving with trays of steaming casseroles or jugs of sweet tea, welcomed warmly at that creaking screen door. He wonders what it might feel like to be part of such simple joys. It's a life he has only observed from a distance, never tasted. The sun rolls high above Cedar Grove, gilding every last cornstalk in a soft glow. Yet Walter feels no warmth in his heart. He's just a shadow on the outskirts, daydreaming of a life that doesn't revolve around barking on command. In the silence of the late afternoon, his only companion is hope, a faint spark that tells him something different might be waiting just beyond the fence. Night fell on Cedar Grove with the hush of a lullaby, drawing a curtain of clouds over the moonlit sky. Walter sensed a coming storm long before the thunder rolled in. The air felt thick, and the cicadas stopped their nightly chorus, as if holding their breath for what was next. He paced alongside the leaning fence, each crack of distant lightning illuminating the fields in a pale, electric glow. Normally, he would have curled up near the back porch by now, waiting for the rain to pass. But something in the wind prickled at his senses, a soft stirring that wouldn't let him rest. Then he heard it, a faint whimper that sounded like a child's plea, or maybe a small animal in distress. Walter froze, ears perched, scanning the yard with practiced vigilance. Another flash of lightning tore across the sky, revealing a hunched silhouette near the old pickup truck, rusting in the far corner of the property. Without hesitation, Walter trotted toward it, mud clinging to his paws as the heavens opened in a downpour. Beneath the truck's sagging frame, in a puddle of shadow, Walter spotted a tiny rabbit. Its fur was matted with mud, and one of its hind legs seemed twisted at an odd angle. The poor creature shivered, pressing itself tight against the cold metal wheel well, as if trying to vanish into thin air. Walter had never been this close to a rabbit before, especially not one so vulnerable. He'd been taught to chase them off the fields if he ever spotted them nibbling the crops, but the look in the rabbit's eyes wasn't that of a thief caught in the act. It was sheer terror. Something stirred in Walter's chest, a feeling both unsettling and warm, like an ember just starting to glow. He lowered himself onto his belly, inching forward with careful, deliberate movements. Raindrops pelted the truck's roof, creating a drumming sound that masked his breath. The rabbit quivered, eyes wide, but didn't flee. It was too frightened or too hurt to move. Walter gently sniffed at the air between them, picking up the scent of rain-soaked fur and raw fear. A memory flickered in his mind. The day he'd first arrived at this farm, heart pounding as he sensed he was unwanted. That same dread now lived behind the rabbit's timid stare. Walter backed away, unsure of what to do next. He had no kind master's voice guiding him, no written rule book telling him how to handle a wounded rabbit. What he did have, however, was a pang in his soul that felt a lot like compassion. Sliding out from under the truck, he padded over to the small metal dish that served as his supper bowl. There was only half a handful of kibble left, soaked by rain, but it was better than nothing. Walter grasped a mouthful and returned to the truck, dropping the morsels close enough for the rabbit to notice, but not so close that it would feel threatened. For a few long seconds, nothing happened. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Then, with trembling whiskers, the rabbit stretched its neck and sniffed the soggy food. Its eyes darted warily from Walter to the fence and back again as if expecting a trap, but no threat came. Slowly, gingerly, it inched forward and began nibbling, each bite a small victory over despair. Walter lay perfectly still, every fiber of him focused on not scaring his tiny companion away. The storm raged on, driving sheets of rain across the yard. Yet under that old truck there was a fragile truce. Two souls who had no one else to turn to. In that moment, Walter forgot every command he'd been taught about chasing small creatures. Instead, he realized that sometimes the greatest act of guarding isn't about defending property, it's about protecting hope. And that night, he chose to guard the little spark of life that shivered beside him in the dark. Morning arrived in Cedar Grove with a soft drizzle and muted sunlight, the storm having worn itself out during the night. Walter stirred beneath the pickup truck, still on high alert from hours of half-sleep. Nearby, the rabbit was curled into a tight ball, its fur damp from the rain that had seeped in. At some point before dawn, the creature had inched closer to Walter, as if recognizing him as a source of warmth rather than fear. Now they both blinked in the gray light of a new day, uncertain of what came next. Walter stretched his stiff legs and crept out from the truck, shaking the raindrops off his coat. The rabbit peered at him with wide eyes, as though torn between wanting to follow and staying hidden. A few soggy kibbles remained scattered on the dirt, and the rabbit nibbled at them tentatively, glancing over its shoulder at the large dog standing guard. Walter gave a gentle snort, not quite a bark, just enough sound to say, "It's okay, I won't hurt you." He didn't realize how protective he felt until the gate creaked from across the yard. One of the farm hands had arrived. A lanky fellow in muddy boots stepped in carrying a small toolbox. Walter instinctively tensed, remembering how most humans around here treated him with indifferent shrugs, if not outright scolding. He positioned himself between the rabbit and the newcomer, tail held stiff but not threatening. The farmhand cast a quick glance at Walter, then at the dirt under the truck, and simply went about his task of mending a broken fence board. That was all the permission Walter needed, to believe that he and the rabbit could remain unnoticed for a little while longer. A cautious calm settled over the morning. The drizzle tapered off, leaving behind puddles reflecting a pale sky. Walter guided the rabbit to a drier patch of ground near a collapsed old barn wall. There, sheltered from the wind, the two unlikely companions started to form a wordless understanding. Walter couldn't mend the rabbit's twisted hind leg, but he nudged it toward the softest bedding he could find, a mixture of stray hay and grass clippings, and circled around protectively, as if creating an invisible barrier no one could cross. By midday, the sun broke through the clouds and warmed the farm. With it came new challenges. In the distance, an echoing bark rippled through the humid air. Walter's ears perked. He recognized that bark. It belonged to a neighborhood dog that sometimes wandered onto the property. The dog was big, burly, and quick to pick fights for fun. Walter had never bothered defending his turf before. He simply let the interloper roam, saving his energy for nights when the farm's owner demanded vigilance. But this time was different. His entire being buzzed with a fierce resolve. Nothing would harm his wounded rabbit. Sure enough, before long, a stocky shape came trotting around the corner of the barn. The other dog, a muscular black mutt with a torn ear, padded closer, sniffing the air. Its gaze locked on the rabbit, now trembling behind Walter's hind legs. Walter let out a low, warning growl, surprising even himself with the firmness of it. All the times he'd been told to bark or chase had never felt like this, like something he chose because it mattered deep in his bones. The intruder paused, ears flicking in uncertain caution. Perhaps it had never seen Walter stand so confidently before. For a tense moment, the only sound was the distant croak of frogs in the wet ditches. Then, with a short bark, the dog turned and loped off, deciding this confrontation wasn't worth it. Walter stayed rigid a moment longer, tail raised, eyes narrowed, until he was sure the threat had passed. Inside his chest, his heart pounded like a drum. The wave of relief that followed felt like stepping into a patch of warm sunshine after hours of cold. Slowly, Walter turned back to the rabbit, which had flattened itself against the ground. He licked the top of its head, a gesture he'd never learned from any command or training manual. Just a sign of reassurance. The rabbit's eyes softened, and it shifted its body to lean just a bit closer to Walter's front paw. Neither could speak, but each knew the other had just risked something precious. Trust had been earned in that charged moment. As the afternoon wore on, Walter managed to scavenge a few forgotten scraps of food near the chicken coop. He brought them to a small companion who ate every morsel with delicate nibbles. Together, they found a quiet sense of routine. The rabbit rested, occasionally testing its injured leg with timid hops, while Walter kept watch for any further disturbances. In these hours, Walter discovered a strange new feeling blooming in his mind. Call it concern, call it care, or maybe even love. It was as if the rabbit's presence awakened a part of him he didn't realize existed. All his life, he'd been told where to stand, when to bark, and how to guard. Now, for the first time, he was guiding himself by an inner compass that pointed squarely toward protecting this fragile creature. Even the sun seemed to linger a bit longer that day, casting its golden light across the farm until late evening. By the time dusk settled, the rabbit was dozing quietly against Walter's side, and the old dog felt a sense of contentment he'd never known. He didn't have a comfy bed or a master's praise, yet he felt more complete than ever. When the stars emerged, Walter gazed up, noticing how the sky looked like a sprawling field of shimmering hope. The world beyond the fence suddenly felt within reach. Maybe tomorrow he'd try to coax the rabbit to a safer spot, or perhaps sniff out better food than a handful of leftover scraps. And if the farm's owner discovered them both, well, Walter's loyalty had found a new direction. No longer for a place, but for a friend. Somewhere nearby, a lone cricket started its nightly tune, and Walter gently lowered his head onto his paws, letting his eyelids grow heavy. He made sure the rabbit was nestled in the crook of his body, shielded from the evening chill. Tonight, they were no longer two strangers in the rain. They were companions, sharing the same soft bed of hope. In the hush of that moment, Walter realized a simple, yet profound truth. Sometimes, the best part of guarding isn't about fences or fields. Sometimes, it's about opening your heart to a life that needs defending, even more than any barn or farmhouse ever could. A warm breeze drifted across the farm the next morning, the air so still it felt like the world was holding its breath. Walter woke under the same crumbling barn wall, the rabbit nestled against his side. Overnight, the little creature had managed to rest easier than before. Each time it stirred, Walter would place a comforting paw nearby, silently promising it was safe. Now, in the hazy glow of early sunlight, Walter rose and shook off the dew from his golden coat. He was grateful for another quiet dawn, though he had no idea that peace was about to fracture. He nudged the rabbit gently, encouraging it to try standing on all fours. The injured hind leg was still tender, but the swelling had gone down. With wobbly determination, the rabbit hopped forward a few inches, testing its balance. Walter tilted his head, half amazed. The progress was modest but hard-earned, like a small candle flame flickering after nearly being snuffed out. Pride glowed inside him, a sentiment he'd never experienced while patrolling the fence line or obeying orders. He realized that nurturing this fragile life filled an emptiness he hadn't even known existed. Across the yard, a rustle in the farmhouse caught his ear. The door slammed open, and out stepped the farm's owner, dressed in faded overalls and stomping through the grass with a hurried gait. Walter stiffened, a cold prickle of worry creeping through his fur. He'd learned over time to read the man's posture. Stooped shoulders meant exhaustion. A tense jaw meant frustration. But right now, everything about him radiated an anger that crackled like static electricity. Walter stood guard as the man approached the barn, a can of paint and a brush in hand. At first, the owner didn't see Walter and the rabbit tucked against the wall. He started running his palm over the rotten boards, muttering to himself about needing repairs he couldn't afford. But then he turned, and his gaze landed on Walter's golden shape and the tiny shape beside him. In the blink of an eye, the man's expression turned dark. "What on God's green earth?" he growled, dropping the paint can so it clattered against the dirt. "Walter, get away from that vermin!" The rabbit froze, ears flattening as it scrambled closer to Walter's leg. Walter's body went rigid. He'd been barked at before, scolded plenty of times for minor infractions, like lying too close to the porch or wandering off the property line. But this was different. The man's eyes were wide with disdain as he aimed a boot in the rabbit's direction, threatening to prod it away. Without thinking, Walter stepped forward, placing himself directly in the man's path. "Move!" the owner snapped, voice louder than thunder. He swept a hand forward as if to strike Walter, but paused, clearly startled by the steady courage blazing in the dog's brown eyes. For a tense moment, the world seemed to shrink down to just the three of them. The man's heavy breaths rasped like a saw cutting through timber. Walter felt his own heart hammer so hard he feared the rabbit might feel it too. In all his time here, he'd never openly defied an order. He'd barked on cue, run off animals who wandered too close to the crops, and guarded the fence through biting winters. But now, a switch had been flipped deep inside. He wasn't a tool on four legs. He was a living being with a purpose far greater than intimidation or obedience. So he didn't back down. He held his ground, fur bristling along his spine, his lips peeled back in a low, warning growl. The rabbit cowered behind him, trembling. It had no choice but to rely on Walter's bravery. "Well, I'll be," the man hissed through clenched teeth. "You think you know better than me? That's just a wild pest. And you're letting it stay here like it's some honored guest. If it starts chewing on my crops, we'll have nothing to sell come harvest." Walter answered with another rumble in his throat. Not outright aggression, but a clear refusal to budge. This wasn't about produce or property lines. It was about decency. He couldn't let the owner scare or hurt this innocent creature. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Walter recalled being hauled onto this farm in a pickup truck, feeling every bit as frightened and unwelcome as the rabbit did now. Enraged, the man reached for a shovel propped against the barn, brandishing it as though he might swing. A sudden flash of memory sparked in Walter. He pictured the other big dog he'd chased away not long ago. The way adrenaline had surged when he stood firm in defense of his new friend. This time, the stakes were even higher, for the threat came from the very person who was supposed to provide Walter's daily food and shelter. And food. The man stomped closer, but Walter refused to back down. Lightning fear danced in the dog's eyes, yet a steely resolve kept him rooted in place. Finally, the owner halted, letting the shovel hang useless at his side. His fury twisted into something uglier. A calculating glare. "Fine," he spat, voice trembling with rage. "If that's how it's gonna be, you can both go. I've had enough. I don't need a dog that defies me. Now, get off my land." Walter felt a bolt of panic. Where would he go? He'd never had a warm bed, true, but at least he'd had a place to sleep, scraps to eat, a roof nearby when storms rolled in. Without this farm, he'd be just another stray, fending for himself. But then he looked back at the rabbit, whose trembling had resumed in full force. There was no choice, was there? He couldn't abandon the one soul that finally made him feel worthy. A low whine escaped Walter's muzzle, as if to ask, "Are you sure?" The man sneered, raising the shovel once more, though he didn't strike. "You heard me," the owner barked. "I won't feed a dog that thinks it can make its own rules. Take that pest and go." Heart pounding, Walter dipped his head, gently nuzzling the rabbit to encourage it to hop beside him. The creature limped forward, adrenaline dulling the pain. Together they skirted around the glaring man, who stood stiff as a fence post, refusing to budge until they'd fully passed. Walter half expected a strike from behind, but none came, only a bitter silence that trailed them like a shadow as they left the barnyard. They crossed the rickety fence line without a backward glance, stepping onto the dirt road that wound along the edge of Cedar Grove. Every step felt foreign. With no collar, no leash, and no porch light to guide them, Walter and his wounded friend had just become wanderers in a world that rarely made space for the dispossessed. The sun climbed toward noon, and sweat beaded under Walter's coat as he walked. He took each step deliberately, making sure the rabbit could keep up, pausing when its fragile leg quivered. They traveled for what felt like hours, passing fields of soybeans and corn, occasionally ducking behind a bush when a car rumbled by. Now and then, a breeze brought a hint of honeysuckle, sweet and nostalgic, reminiscent of quiet country afternoons. Once in a while they encountered old farmsteads with peeling paint and rusted mailboxes, but Walter dared not approach. He feared the sight of the shovel, the harsh voice of a stranger who'd see the rabbit as a pest to be chased off. Finally, as late afternoon tinted the sky gold, they reached a small thicket near a narrow creek. Walter guided the rabbit down a gentle slope, where the bank was sandy and the water shallow, safe enough to drink without the rabbit toppling over. He lapped up a few mouthfuls, then nudged the rabbit to do the same. Thirst quenched, they curled up on a patch of weeds, exhausted and uncertain. Hunger gnawed at Walter's belly. It had been a day since his last real meal. The rabbit had been living off scraps. Even so, a strange sense of freedom glimmered through his fatigue. For the first time he was answering only to his own conscience, no master's scowl, no chain or fence. He glanced at the rabbit, who panted softly, ears twitching at every rustle of leaves. Though its eyes were still riddled with fear, Walter sensed a faint trust shining there. Maybe it was the same trust that now guided him, however blindly, down the open road. He settled his head on his paws, thinking of what lay behind them. An empty doghouse, a hostile owner, a life of strict commands and meager affection. Ahead, the horizon stretched indefinitely, promising both hardship and possibility. Something told him the next chapter of their journey would be a test of endurance and faith, but it also might lead to the sort of kindness they both hungered for. A gentle breeze set the leaves rustling overhead, sounding almost like applause. As twilight began to soften the sky, Walter closed his eyes, preparing for another night under the open stars. The rabbit curled closer, resting its small head against Walter's flank. For now they had each other, and that would have to be enough. At the farm, nightfall was likely bringing the usual routines. Lights flicking on, supper on the stove. But for Walter and the rabbit, this was a new, uncharted reality. It didn't matter that they had no walls around them, no bed of straw or wooden porch to call home. What mattered was that they had chosen loyalty and compassion over fear. In a world that so often cast aside the vulnerable, they had each found a fragile alliance, an unspoken bond worth fighting for. And though the journey ahead remained uncertain, Walter sensed in his bones that every step away from the farm was a step closer to discovering a kinder corner of the world, somewhere that might welcome two misfits who simply wanted to be safe, to heal, and, most of all, to belong. The morning after their reluctant exile from the farm broke clear and crisp, with a sunrise that glowed orange like cinders in the eastern sky. Walter stirred first, yawning wide as he took stock of their makeshift camp near the creek. He glanced down to see the rabbit curled up against his side, its injured legs stretched gingerly before it. The previous day's trek had been a lonely one, long stretches of road with no friendly faces. But Walter felt a quiet sense of purpose. For the first time in his life, every decision he made came from a place of genuine care. Not an order barked into his ears. He rose and gave his companion a gentle nudge, encouraging the rabbit to try hobbling around to loosen its stiff muscles. With a few determined hops, the rabbit managed to get comfortable enough to nibble at the dewy grass near the creek bank. Walter scanned the horizon, weighing his options. He needed to find something more than just stray bits of food if they were going to survive. He wasn't sure how far Cedar Grove's main street lay from here, but he guessed it might offer a few scraps, or, if luck really smiled, a kind soul. They moved on a little after dawn, following a dirt path that wound through a grove of sweet gum trees. The underbrush rustled with life, birds searching for insects, squirrels chattering from their high perches. The rabbit took in these sounds with pricked ears, as though reacquainting itself with a world that wasn't all fear and pain. Walter stayed close, never straying more than a step or two away. The morning air was cool enough to soothe their aching bodies, yet, with every mile, hunger gnawed more fiercely at his empty stomach. By midday, they reached a rutted asphalt road that cut through rolling farmland. Ahead, Walter spotted a narrow sign pointing toward a place called Brookwood Hollow. The prospect of any kind of settlement lifted his spirits, even if it was just another sleepy stretch of countryside. With the rabbit hopping tentatively at his heels, he followed the sign's direction, guided by faith that somewhere beyond these hills, a gentle corner of the world might welcome two vagabonds in need of shelter. Hours later, the sun sat high overhead, glaring down with enough heat to make the pavement shimmer. The rabbit's pace slowed to near exhaustion, so Walter searched for shade, leading them beneath a cluster of willow trees alongside a dry creek bed. He knew they couldn't keep pushing forever. Just as he settled the rabbit in a patch of dappled shade, a faint clatter rose in the distance, like squeaky wheels on gravel. Ears perked, he peered through the branches. An old rickety cart came into view, pulled by a stout pony and steered by a bent figure in a straw hat. An older woman, her silver hair tied back in a low bun. Walter's heart quickened. Would she shoo them away, same as the farm's owner had done? Or might she see past their ragged appearances? The woman halted her pony, leaning forward to scrutinize the dog and the trembling rabbit beneath the willow. "Well now," she murmured, voice soft like a lullaby, "what do we have here?" Cautiously, Walter stepped into the open, making sure to position himself between the rabbit and this stranger. He'd defend his friend if need be, but something in the woman's gentle gaze eased his tension. She set down the cart's reins, then stood to her full height, not much more than 5 feet, before gingerly climbing off. "Easy there, buddy," she said, inching closer. "I won't hurt you." Walter froze, uncertain. Then the woman bent down, rummaging in a small basket by her side, and pulled out what looked to be a handful of oats. She tossed a few on the ground. "Either of you hungry?" she asked softly, eyeing the rabbit. The smell was almost heavenly compared to the stale kibble Walter remembered. He glanced back at the rabbit, whose nose twitched, picking up the enticing scent. Yet, it didn't move. Still too scared to trust a human. Summoning his courage, Walter stepped forward, sniffed at the oats, then crunched a mouthful. The woman smiled, faint lines deepening around her kind eyes. "There's more where that came from, if you two want to follow me," she said, wiping her brow. "My name's Harriet. I live just up the road." Walter weighed her invitation. The rabbit's leg needed rest and better care than he could provide on his own. He might be able to fend for himself, scavenging roadside ditches for scraps, but the rabbit stood little chance. With a slow wag of his tail, a gesture that felt both foreign and right, Walter nudged his friend toward Harriet. Hesitantly, the rabbit hopped forward, drawn by the sweet smell of feed and the soft warmth of Harriet's voice. Within minutes, Harriet had them riding in the back of her cart, shielded from the sun by an old quilt she'd draped over Walter's back. The pony clopped along a winding gravel lane until a cozy farmhouse came into view. Unlike Walter's previous home, this place radiated genuine welcome. Colorful wind chimes danced in the breeze on the front porch. A patch of sunflowers towered by the door, their golden faces turned skyward. "Let's see if we can fix that leg," Harriet murmured, guiding the cart to a gentle halt. "Won't be fancy, but I've got bandages and a knack for healing banged-up critters." She led them into a modest barn, its clean straw smelling of hay and sweet feed. Carefully, she examined the rabbit's injured leg, clicking her tongue sympathetically. "Poor thing. Looks like you've had a rough go of it." She cleaned the wound, applied a bit of ointment, and fashioned a makeshift splint out of a thin piece of wood in cloth strips. Throughout, the rabbit trembled, but didn't resist, likely too tired to fight help when it came so gently. Walter sat close, heart pounding with relief and gratitude. Later that day, Harriet served them a meal that felt like a bounty. Fresh water, scraps of cooked chicken for Walter, and diced carrots for the rabbit. As they ate, Harriet talked in a steady, soothing tone, occasionally reaching out to stroke Walter's ears. He flinched at first, unaccustomed to a hand that didn't strike or shove, but soon melted under her touch. It reminded him of a kindness he had long ago convinced himself might never come his way. Night fell softly over Harriet's farm. Fireflies flickered in the tall grasses, and a warm glow spilled from the windows of her little house. Harriet set down an old blanket in the barn and patted it. "You're welcome to sleep here if you like," she said, her voice quiet and hopeful. "I know you've probably been turned away before, but not by me. Not ever." Walter stepped onto the blanket, testing its softness, and the rabbit followed suit, curling into a gentle hollow by his belly. Harry smiled, then ambled back toward the house, leaving the door slightly ajar so the lantern light cast a comforting beam. For a time, Walter just listened to the wind rustling the leaves, the distant call of a night bird, and the rabbit's slow breathing. Any moment, he half expected the dream to shatter, but Harriet's kindness was real, and for the first time since leaving the farm, Walter felt more than free. He felt drowsiness tugged at his eyelids, and he lowered his head. He thought about how quickly life could change, how a single moment of bravery, standing up to his former owner, had led him to this barn filled with straw and the gentle hum of a kind woman's presence. Tomorrow, Harriet might let them explore her yard, or introduce them to the other animals she likely cared for. Maybe, if that went well, he'd stay. Maybe the rabbit, once healed, would hop around her garden nibbling lettuce or dandelions in the sun. Maybe they'd both finally find the belonging they'd always searched for. Stars glimmered through the barn's cracks, and a sense of peace settled over Walter like a soft blanket. He felt the rabbit nestle closer, letting out a contented sigh. Outside, the world kept turning. Somewhere, angry men with shovels and cold hearts likely roamed. But not here, not tonight. Tonight they had Harriet's gentle voice, her warm barn, and the promise of a tomorrow free from fear. If there was ever a second chance for two battered souls, Walter knew they had found it, and in that quiet hush, he realized that sometimes the love we stumble upon can shine brighter than any we'd ever dreamed of chasing. So he closed his eyes with a heart no longer weighed down by loneliness, thinking that if he could speak in words, he'd tell the rabbit, "We made it, friend. We're finally home." In the end, isn't it remarkable how a single act of kindness can ripple through the world, touching lives in the most unexpected ways? That's the true magic of compassion. It reaches beyond fences and fears, inviting hope into even the loneliest corners of our hearts. If this story has moved you, please consider supporting our channel. Subscribe, leave a like, or share it with someone who might need a little light today. By doing so, you become part of a larger story, one where every act of care makes a difference. Thank you for watching, and may love guide your journey, always.